If you ever hear your wife say, "He's a good man, just not ambitious," change the locks. Trust me on this one. I'm Chris Dalton, 39 years old, and I learned this lesson the hard way when I found my wife Fiona's tablet sitting open on our kitchen counter, displaying a message that would change everything. "You're dumping him, right? I'll make it worth your while. Bryce." I stared at those words for a full minute, my coffee growing cold in my hand. Bryce Caraway, Fiona's boss at Morrison Financial. The same guy she'd been networking with for the past 6 months, staying late at the office, attending weekend strategy sessions, and coming home smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine. My wife of 12 years was planning to dump me for her wealthy married boss, and apparently he was paying her to do it. I'm an IT security contractor, ex-Marine, the kind of guy who wears flannel shirts and drives a 10-year-old pickup truck. Fiona is a rising corporate executive who's been climbing the ladder at Morrison Financial with the determination of someone who grew up poor and never wants to go back. Her mother, Margaret, made sure of that, constantly reminding Fiona that she could do better than a blue-collar husband. The signs had been there for months. The cold shoulders, the late nights, the way she'd started dressing like she was auditioning for a fashion magazine. Her friends Tasha and Kim had been dropping hints at barbecues, talking about Fiona's work husband and making snide comments about my lack of ambition. But seeing it spelled out in black and white? That hit different. I screenshot the message and sent it to myself, then closed the tablet exactly as I'd found it. Fiona was upstairs getting ready for another important meeting with Bryce. I could hear her heels clicking across the hardwood floor of our bedroom as she practiced her presentation. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother Dave, a city cop who'd served 2 tours in the Middle East with me before joining Cleveland PD. "Beer tonight? Pete's place?" "Yeah," I typed back. "I might need several." Dave knew something was up. We had that twin telepathy thing, even though he was 2 years older. When one of us was in trouble, the other could sense it from across town. Pete's Bar was our usual hangout, a dive bar on the east side where Pete Kowalski, our former squad leader, served cheap beer and listened to our problems without judgment. The 3 of us had been through heck together overseas, and that bond doesn't break just because you're back in civilian clothes. I spent the rest of the morning thinking about that message and what it meant. Fiona wanted out, but she wanted to be compensated for the inconvenience. Bryce, with his family money and executive salary, was apparently willing to pay for the privilege of stealing another man's wife. The funny thing is, if they'd just been honest about it, I probably would have let her go without a fight. Our marriage had been dying a slow death for years, ended by her ambition and my contentment with a simple life. But the scheming, the lies, the casual cruelty of it all, that pissed me off. Around noon, I remembered something my paranoid father had insisted on when Fiona and I got married. A prenuptial agreement with what he called an initiator compensation clause. At the time, I thought he was being ridiculous. Now I was starting to think the old man was a genius. I pulled out our marriage contract from the fireproof safe in my office. There it was, buried in the legal jargon on page 7. In the event that one party initiates divorce proceedings for reasons of adultery or abandonment, said party shall compensate the injured party with 5 years of their current annual salary plus a $50,000 penalty fee. Fiona made $90,000 a year at Morrison Financial. 5 times $90,000 plus $50,000 in penalties, $450,000, plus whatever damages I could prove for her affair with Bryce. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. My wife was about to dump me for money, not knowing that doing so would cost her almost $500,000. My phone rang. "Fiona. Chris, I'm going to be late tonight. Another strategy session with the executive team." "Of course you are," I said. "Don't wait up for me either. I'm having drinks with Dave and Pete." "Fine. We should probably talk soon anyway." "About us, I mean." "Yeah," I said, still grinning at the contract in my hands. "We should definitely talk about us." After she hung up, I called my lawyer, Jim Morrison. Not related to the financial company, just an unfortunate coincidence. Jim had handled our house purchase and a few minor legal issues over the years. He was a straight shooter who didn't charge ridiculous fees. "Jim, I need you to review my prenup. Specifically, the compensation clause." "Chris, what's going on? Are you and Fiona having problems? Let's just say I'm planning for all contingencies." Jim agreed to meet me the next morning. I spent the rest of the day gathering evidence. Screenshots of Fiona's messages, credit card statements showing expensive dinners I hadn't attended, hotel charges from her business trips that didn't match her official travel schedule. By the time I got to Pete's that evening, I had a folder full of documentation and a plan that was starting to take shape. "You look like a man who just found out his lottery ticket was a winner," Pete said as I walked in. "Something like that," I said, ordering a beer. "Where's Dave?" "Running late, some domestic disturbance call. He'll be here." I sat at the bar, sipping my beer and thinking about the conversation I'd be having with Fiona soon. She thought she was trading up, dumping her blue-collar husband for a wealthy executive. What she didn't know was that her wealthy executive was about to cost her everything she'd worked for. Dave showed up an hour later, still in uniform, looking tired. "Long day?" I asked. "Aren't they all? What's got you looking so pleased with yourself?" I slid him the screenshot of Bryce's message. Dave read it, his expression darkening. "Son of a witch," he said quietly. "How long has this been going on?" "Months, probably. Maybe longer. She's planning to dump me at her mother's birthday dinner tomorrow night. Big public announcement in front of family and friends." "And you're going to let her?" "Oh, I'm going to encourage her," I said, raising my beer in a mock toast. "In fact, I'm going to make it the best decision she's ever made." Dave looked confused until I explained about the compensation clause. Then he started grinning too. "Your dad was a paranoid old bastard, but he was smart. The smartest. Fiona's about to learn that sometimes the quiet guy in the flannel shirt is the one you should worry about." We spent the next 2 hours planning my counterattack. Dave, with his police connections, could help me gather additional evidence if needed. Pete offered his bar as a safe meeting place if things got complicated. By the time I got home that night, Fiona was already asleep. Or pretending to be. I lay in bed next to my wife, listening to her breathe, knowing that tomorrow night everything would change. She wanted to dump me for money? Fine. But she was going to pay for the privilege. Margaret Hartwell's 65th birthday party was being held at Chez Laurent, the kind of upscale restaurant where the waiters wear bow ties, and the wine list starts at $50 a bottle. Fiona had insisted on paying, which should have been my first clue that something big was coming. I wore my best suit, a navy blue number that Fiona had bought me for her company Christmas party 2 years ago. She wore a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment, and she looked stunning. For a moment, I almost felt bad about what was coming. Almost. The guest list was a who's who of Fiona's social climbing ambitions. Her mother, Margaret, of course, holding court at the head of the table like a queen receiving tribute. Fiona's work friends, Tasha and Kim, both divorced and bitter about it. Several colleagues from Morrison Financial, including Bryce Carraway himself, looking smug and self-satisfied in his $1,000 suit. Bryce's wife Sylvia was notably absent. "Business trip," Bryce had explained when someone asked, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Marriage trouble, no doubt. Probably had something to do with his extracurricular activities with my wife. The dinner conversation was the usual mix of corporate gossip and social positioning. Margaret held forth on the importance of marrying well and maximizing one's potential. Tasha and Kim discussed their latest dating disasters. The Morrison Financial crowd talked shop, dropping names and numbers like they were impressing someone. I sat quietly, eating my overpriced salmon and waiting for the show to begin. It started during dessert. Fiona stood up, tapping her wine glass with her fork to get everyone's attention. The table fell silent, all eyes on her. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate my mother's special day," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Family and friends mean everything to us, which is why I wanted to share some important news with all of you." Here it comes, I thought. "Chris and I have decided to end our marriage," she announced, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. "We've grown apart over the years, and we both deserve to be happy. I've filed for divorce." The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret looked pleased, which didn't surprise me. Tasha and Kim exchanged meaningful glances. The Morrison Financial people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. All eyes turned to me, waiting for my reaction. I set down my fork, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and stood up slowly. "Well, I said, raising my wine glass. "Here's to new beginnings and unexpected consequences." Fiona frowned. That wasn't the reaction she'd expected. "You're not upset?" she asked. "Upset? Fiona, I'm proud of you for finally being honest about what you want. It takes courage to admit when you've outgrown someone." The confusion in her eyes was priceless. She'd expected anger, maybe pleading. Instead, I was congratulating her. "I've already spoken to my lawyer about the divorce proceedings," I continued. "Jim Morrison. No relation to your company. Just a coincidence. He's reviewed our prenuptial agreement and assured me that everything will be handled fairly and according to the terms we agreed to when we got married. Now Fiona looked genuinely confused. Prenup? We don't have a prenup. Actually, we do. Your mother insisted on it, remember? Said it would protect both our interests. My father added a few clauses of his own. Very thorough document. Margaret's face had gone pale. She remembered the prenup, even if Fiona had forgotten about it. What kind of clauses? Fiona asked, her voice suddenly uncertain. Oh, the usual stuff. Asset protection, debt responsibility, compensation for the injured party in case of adultery or abandonment. Standard boilerplate language, really. Bryce was looking uncomfortable now, probably wondering where this was heading. Compensation? Fiona repeated. 5 years of the initiating party's salary, plus a $50,000 penalty fee. In your case, that comes to $450,000 plus whatever additional damages can be proven. I smiled at her shocked expression. Congratulations, honey. You just bought yourself the most expensive divorce in Cleveland. The table erupted in whispers and gasps. Tasha pulled out her phone, probably to live stream the drama to her social media followers. Kim looked like she was watching her favorite soap opera. The Morrison financial people were calculating numbers in their heads. Fiona sat down hard, her face white with shock. That can't be legal, she whispered. Oh, it's very legal. You signed it 12 years ago. Jim has the original documents properly notarized and witnessed. Your mother signed as a witness, actually. All eyes turned to Margaret, who was studying her dessert plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Mother? Fiona's voice was sharp with accusation. I thought it was just to protect the house, Margaret said weakly. I didn't read all the fine print. The fine print, I said cheerfully, is where all the important stuff lives. My father was a paranoid man, but he was thorough. He insisted on that compensation clause specifically to discourage gold digging and infidelity. Bryce cleared his throat. Chris, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Why privately, Bryce? We're all friends here, right? Besides, Fiona wanted to make this announcement public, so we might as well handle all the details publicly, too. I pulled out my phone and showed the table the screenshot of Bryce's message. You're dumping him, right? I'll make it worth your while. The silence was absolute now. Even the waiters had stopped moving. I have to say, Bryce, I appreciate the business proposal. It's not every day someone offers to pay my wife to divorce me. Very entrepreneurial thinking. Sylvia Caraway chose that moment to walk into the restaurant. She'd apparently cut her business trip short and come looking for her husband. She took one look at the shocked faces around our table and smiled coldly. Don't stop on my account, she said, pulling up an empty chair. This looks fascinating. Fiona was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. You knew? I know a lot of things, Fee. I know about the hotel charges on your credit card. I know about the expensive dinners you've been having without me. I know about the weekend strategy sessions that don't appear on Morrison Financial's official calendar. Bryce was sweating now, acutely aware of his wife's presence. Sylvia, this isn't what it looks like. It looks like you've been screwing your employee and paying her to divorce her husband so you can have her all to yourself, Sylvia said conversationally. Is that not what it looks like? I think we should all calm down, Margaret said desperately. I'm perfectly calm, I said. In fact, I'm calmer than I've been in months. It's amazing how relaxing it is when everything finally makes sense. I stood up and dropped my napkin on the table. Fiona, you'll be hearing from Jim Morrison in the morning. He'll walk you through the divorce proceedings and the compensation schedule. Don't worry about the money. I'm sure Bryce will help you out, right, Bryce? Bryce was staring at his hands, probably calculating how much this was going to cost him. Where are you going? Fiona asked. Home, to change the locks. Jim advised me to secure the marital assets until the divorce is finalized. Standard procedure in cases involving adultery. I nodded politely to the table. Thank you for a lovely evening, everyone. Margaret, happy birthday. I hope it was everything you hoped for. As I walked toward the exit, I could hear the explosion of voices behind me. Tasha was already on her phone, probably calling everyone she knew. Kim was asking Fiona if she was okay. Margaret was demanding to see the prenup documents. And Sylvia Caraway was having a very quiet, very intense conversation with her husband about his extracurricular activities. I got in my truck and drove home, feeling lighter than I had in years. The hardest part was over. Fiona had made her choice, publicly and dramatically, exactly as I'd hoped she would. Now came the fun part. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Fiona, calling from what I assumed was Bryce's place, since she certainly wasn't coming home to our house with the new locks I'd had installed. Chris, we need to talk. Good morning to you too, Fee. How was your night? Don't be cute. That prenup can't be enforceable. I'm going to fight it. You're certainly welcome to try. Jim Morrison says it's ironclad, but what does he know? He's only been practicing family law for 25 years. I could hear her breathing hard, probably fighting the urge to scream at me. This is insane. $450,000? I don't have that kind of money. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Maybe Bryce can help, since this was his idea. It wasn't his idea. I have the text message saying otherwise, along with about 6 months of evidence showing your affair. Jim thinks we might be able to claim additional damages for emotional distress and intentional infliction of harm. Could push the total up to $600,000, maybe more. The line went quiet for a long moment. You bastard, she finally whispered. I'm the bastard? Fee, you've been cheating on me for months, planning to dump me at a public dinner and taking money from your married boss to do it. But I'm the bastard for enforcing a contract you signed? She hung up on me. An hour later, my work phone rang. My supervisor at Tech Secure Solutions, a guy named Robert Chen who'd hired me 3 years ago and never given me any trouble. Chris, I need to see you in my office this morning. We've had some complaints about your conduct. What kind of complaints? Just come in, we'll discuss it. I knew exactly what this was about. Fiona was trying to get me fired, probably hoping that losing my job would make me more willing to negotiate on the divorce settlement. What she didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything for months, including her use of company resources for personal business. Morrison Financial had very strict policies about employee conduct, and having an affair with your married boss while using company credit cards to pay for hotel rooms was definitely against policy. I drove to my office, stopping first at a FedEx store to mail a package to Morrison Financial's Human Resources Department. The package contained copies of Fiona's credit card statements, hotel receipts, and text messages, along with a letter expressing my concern about potential misuse of company resources. Robert was waiting for me with a thick folder and a serious expression. Chris, I've received several calls about your behavior toward your wife. Accusations of financial misuse, controlling behavior, harassment. From who? I can't reveal the sources, but they're credible people who know you both. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshot of Bryce's message. Robert, my wife has been having an affair with her boss for months. She announced our divorce at a public dinner last night, not knowing that our prenup includes a compensation clause that's going to cost her almost $500,000. Now she's trying to get me fired, so I'll be more willing to negotiate. Robert studied the message, his expression shifting from concern to understanding. This is her boss asking her to divorce you? For money, yes. I have 6 months of evidence documenting their affair, including misuse of Morrison Financial's corporate credit cards for personal expenses. I've already forwarded copies to their HR department. Robert leaned back in his chair. Jesus, Chris, what a mess. It's about to get messier. Fiona's going to escalate this, probably try to paint me as a controlling husband or something. I wanted you to know the truth before she starts spreading lies. I appreciate that. For what it's worth, I've never seen any indication that you're anything other than a decent guy. But if this gets ugly, I understand. You have to protect the company. Just remember that everything I'm doing is legal and documented. I'm not the one breaking laws or company policies. I spent the rest of the morning working on a security audit for one of our clients, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy while my personal life exploded around me. Around noon, my brother Dave called. You need to see the news, he said. I pulled up the local news website on my computer. There it was. Local executive claims husband is financially exploiting her through divorce settlement. The article featured a photo of Fiona looking tragic and victimized, with quotes about how I was using archaic legal documents to punish her for wanting to end an unhappy marriage. She claimed the prenup was signed under duress and that I was trying to financially ruin her out of spite. There was no mention of Bryce, no mention of the affair, no mention of the fact that she'd publicly announced the divorce at her mother's birthday party. She's playing the victim, Dave said, classic manipulation tactic. Let her. I have documentation for everything. The truth will come out. But even as I said it, I could feel the situation shifting. Fiona was better at public relations than I was, and she had the advantage of playing the wronged woman. In the court of public opinion, The wealthy, successful executive would always get more sympathy than the blue-collar husband demanding compensation. That evening, I met Dave and Pete at the bar to strategize. Pete had already seen the news story and was furious on my behalf. "She's making you look like some kind of financial predator," he said. "What are you going to do about it?" "Fight back," I said simply, "but carefully. Everything I do has to be legal and documented." "What do you need?" Dave asked. "Information. Fiona's going to keep escalating this, probably try to make me look dangerous or unstable. I need to be ready for whatever she throws at me." Dave nodded. "I can keep an ear out for anything official. If she files any kind of restraining order or harassment complaint, I'll know about it." "And I can provide security," Pete added. "If things get physical, you'll need backup." I appreciated their loyalty, but I hoped it wouldn't come to that. This was supposed to be a legal battle, not a street fight. I was wrong about that. 2 nights later, I was walking out of Pete's bar around 10 p.m. when 2 men approached me in the parking lot. They were big guys, professionally built, wearing dark clothes and serious expressions. "Chris Dalton?" one of them asked. "Depends who's asking. You need to drop the divorce settlement. Walk away from the money and nobody gets hurt." I looked around the parking lot. It was mostly empty, just a few cars and no witnesses. These guys had chosen their moment carefully. "And if I don't? Then you're going to have an accident. Maybe a bad fall down some stairs. Maybe your truck has brake problems. Accidents happen all the time." The other guy stepped closer. "Your wife just wants to move on with her life. Why are you making this so difficult?" "Because she signed a contract," I said. "And contracts have consequences. So do being stubborn." The first guy reached into his jacket, probably going for a tool. That's when my Marine training kicked in. I grabbed his wrist and twisted, hearing bones crack as he dropped whatever he'd been reaching for. The second guy rushed me, but I was ready for him. A quick jab to his solar plexus doubled him over, and a knee to his face put him down. The first guy was still standing, clutching his broken wrist and looking at me with new respect. "You made a mistake coming here," I told him. "This is a cop bar. Half the customers are off-duty police, including my brother, who's probably watching from the window right now." Sure enough, Dave was coming out the back door with 2 other cops, all of them armed and looking very interested in what was happening in the parking lot. The 2 thugs took off running, leaving behind a knife and clear signs of injury from the second guy's broken nose. "Friends of yours?" Dave asked as we watched them disappear into the night. "Wedding gifts for my loving wife, I think." Dave picked up the knife with a napkin, careful not to contaminate any fingerprints. "I'll run this through the system, see if it matches anything. You want to file a report?" "Not yet. Let's see if they try again first." But I knew this was just the beginning. Fiona was desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. The question was how far she was willing to go to avoid paying the compensation she owed me. I was about to find out. 3 days after the parking lot incident, I was working late at my home office when the lights went out. Not just in my house, the entire street was dark. Someone had cut the power to the whole block. I grabbed my phone and called Dave, but the call wouldn't go through. Cell towers were probably jammed. These weren't random thugs this time. This was professional. I made my way to my bedroom closet and retrieved my service pistol from the safe. 12 years of civilian life hadn't made me forget how to handle a threat. I moved through my house systematically, checking windows and doors, looking for signs of entry. The front door was still locked, but the back door was standing open. I hadn't left it that way. I was turning to investigate when something hard hit me in the back of the head. The last thing I saw before everything went black was a figure in dark clothing standing over me. I woke up in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, tied to a metal chair with zip ties around my wrists and ankles. My head was pounding and my mouth tasted metallic and bitter. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows on concrete walls and rusted equipment. 2 men were standing in front of me, the same 2 from the parking lot, plus a third guy who looked like management, expensive suit, clean hands, the kind of guy who gave orders instead of getting them dirty. "Mr. Dalton," the suit said, "I apologize for the dramatic circumstances, but you've been remarkably stubborn about a very simple request. Let me guess. Drop the divorce settlement or else." "Exactly. You're a smart man. I'm sure you understand that $450,000 is a lot of money. Some people might do desperate things to avoid paying that kind of debt. Some people might, but Fiona's not that desperate. She's got Bryce to help her out, right?" The suit smiled. "Mr. Carroway is having his own financial difficulties at the moment. His wife has filed for divorce and frozen their joint assets. He's not in a position to help anyone right now. That was news to me, but it made sense. Sylvia Caraway had looked ready for war at the restaurant. She'd probably been planning her own revenge while I was planning mine. So what's the plan here? I asked. Beat me up until I agree to forget about the money? Nothing so crude. We're going to have an accident. A tragic case of a distraught husband who couldn't handle his divorce and decided to end it all. Very sad, very believable. Except I'm not the distraught one. Fiona's the one facing bankruptcy. Details. The important thing is that with you gone, the compensation clause becomes void. Fiona inherits your assets as your widow, and everyone moves on with their lives. The two thugs from the parking lot were standing behind the suit, looking eager to get started. One of them had his wrist in a cast from our previous encounter. The other one's nose was still swollen and discolored. Before we begin, the suit continued, Mr. Caraway wanted to speak with you personally. A door opened at the far end of the warehouse, and Bryce Caraway walked in. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since the restaurant incident. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Chris, he said, trying to sound reasonable, this doesn't have to end badly for everyone. It's already ended badly for you, Bryce. Your wife filed for divorce, your girlfriend owes me $500,000, and now you're involved in kidnapping. How much worse did you want it to get? I'm trying to salvage what I can from this mess. If you drop the compensation claim, I can make sure you walk away from this with enough money to start over somewhere else. How much? $50,000, cash, tonight. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. You want me to give up a $450,000 legal settlement for $50,000 in kidnapping money? Bryce, you're even dumber than I thought. His face flushed red. You arrogant son of a witch. You have no idea what you've cost me. My wife took everything. My job is in jeopardy. The board is talking about firing me for moral turpitude. And whose fault is that? Yours. You could have just let Fiona go quietly. Instead, you had to make it into some kind of public spectacle. I didn't make it public, Bryce. Fiona did that when she announced our divorce at her mother's birthday party. I just made sure there were consequences. Bryce pulled out a tool, a small silver pistol that looked expensive and well-maintained. His hands were shaking, which was not reassuring. This is your last chance, Chris. Sign a document dropping the compensation claim or I'll end you myself. With your own tool? In front of witnesses? Bryce, you really are terrible at this crime thing. The suit stepped forward. Mr. Caraway, perhaps you should let us handle this professionally. No, I want him to know that I'm the one who ended this. That's when I heard the sound of vehicles outside the warehouse. Multiple engines, moving fast, coming to a stop just outside the building. The suit looked alarmed. That's not part of the plan. Cleveland police, building is surrounded. Dave's voice amplified by a megaphone. My brother had found me. The two thugs pulled out their own tools, looking to the suit for instructions. Bryce was still pointing his pistol at me, but his hands were shaking worse now. How did they find us? The suit demanded. I smiled at him. GPS tracker in my watch. Military issue, encrypted signal. My brother's been tracking my location since the parking lot incident. The warehouse doors exploded inward as SWAT officers poured through the entrances. Red laser dots danced across the walls as tactical teams took positions. Drop your tools! Get on the ground! The two thugs were smart enough to surrender immediately, dropping their tools and raising their hands. The suit tried to run, but was tackled before he made it 10 feet. Bryce, however, was having some kind of breakdown. He kept the tool pointed at me, tears streaming down his face. This is all your fault, he kept repeating. This is all your fault. Bryce, I said quietly, it's over. Put the tool down. I can't go to prison. I can't lose everything. You've already lost everything. Don't make it worse. Dave appeared in my peripheral vision, moving slowly toward Bryce with his own tool drawn. Sir, I need you to put the tool down. Nobody has to get hurt here. It's too late for that, Bryce said. It's all ruined. Everything's ruined. He turned the tool toward his own head, and for a moment I thought he was going to pull the trigger. Instead, he just collapsed, sobbing, and let Dave take the tool away from him. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the back of an ambulance getting my head checked by a paramedic while Dave filled out paperwork. The warehouse was crawling with cops, crime scene technicians, and federal agents. Kidnapping was a federal crime, which meant Bryce and his hired help we're looking at serious prison time. How did you know where to find me? I asked Dave. Your watch stopped moving 3 hours ago. I figured either you were dead or someone was keeping you in one place. I called in some favors and had the signal traced to this warehouse. Federal crime, I pointed out. This is going to destroy what's left of Bryce's life. Good. Maybe next time he'll think twice before kidnapping someone's brother. The paramedic declared me fit to go home, with instructions to watch for signs of concussion. As I was getting out of the ambulance, my lawyer, Jim Morrison, arrived. Chris, thank God you're all right. I came as soon as I heard. Jim, what does this do to the divorce settlement? It makes it ironclad. Fiona's boyfriend just committed multiple felonies trying to avoid paying what she owes you. No judge in the world is going to side with her now. And the compensation amount? Jim grinned. Kidnapping counts as intentional infliction of emotional distress. We can probably double the damages, maybe triple them. You're looking at well over $1 million, Chris. I looked back at the warehouse, where Bryce Caraway was being loaded into a police van in handcuffs. 3 hours ago, he'd been a wealthy executive with a bright future. Now he was facing federal kidnapping charges and financial ruin, all because he'd wanted to steal another man's wife and thought he could pay to make the consequences go away. Some people never learn, I told Dave as we watched the police van drive away. Learn what? That every choice has a price, and sometimes the price is higher than you can afford to pay. The kidnapping made national news. Executive kidnaps husband to avoid divorce settlement was the headline that ran on CNN, Fox News, and every major network. Suddenly, everyone in America knew about Fiona Dalton, Bryce Caraway, and the prenuptial agreement that had started it all. I was getting interview requests from talk shows, podcast hosts, and documentary filmmakers. Everyone wanted to hear from the blue-collar husband who'd outsmarted the wealthy executives trying to cheat him. I turned them all down. The last thing I needed was more publicity. Fiona, on the other hand, was desperately trying to control the narrative. She hired a public relations firm to paint her as the victim of an archaic and unfair legal system. She gave interviews claiming that she'd had no knowledge of Bryce's kidnapping plan and that she was horrified by his actions. Nobody believed her. The evidence was too overwhelming. Text messages between Fiona and Bryce discussing removing the obstacle to their relationship. Financial records showing that Morrison Financial had paid for the warehouse rental and the hired thugs. Phone records proving that Fiona had been in contact with Bryce throughout the kidnapping. The federal prosecutor handling Bryce's case was very interested in those records. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping carried the same sentence as actually doing the kidnapping, up to life in prison if the victim was seriously injured. Fiona was looking at serious criminal charges on top of the civil damages she owed me. 2 weeks after the kidnapping, I was sitting in Jim Morrison's office reviewing the latest settlement calculations when his secretary buzzed in. Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Dalton is here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. Jim looked at me. Your call, Chris. Send her in. I'm curious what she has to say. Fiona walked into the office looking like a woman who hadn't slept in days. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, and her makeup was smudged, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. This wasn't the polished corporate executive I'd been married to. This was someone who was falling apart. Chris, she said, sitting down across from me without being invited, we need to talk. I'm listening. This has gone too far. The kidnapping, the criminal charges, the media attention, none of this was supposed to happen. What was supposed to happen, Fee? You and Bryce were going to ride off into the sunset while I quietly disappeared? I never wanted you hurt. I swear to God, I had no idea Bryce was planning something like that. Jim pulled out a thick folder. Mrs. Dalton, we have text messages between you and Mr. Caraway discussing permanent solutions to your financial problems. We have phone records showing you were in contact with him during the kidnapping. The federal prosecutor has enough evidence to charge you as a co-conspirator. Fiona's face went white. I could go to prison? 25 to life, Jim said matter-of-factly. Kidnapping is a federal crime. The fact that your husband was physically harmed during the commission of the crime makes it a capital offense. But I didn't know. Ignorance isn't a defense when you're part of a conspiracy. The law assumes that co-conspirators are responsible for all crimes committed in furtherance of the conspiracy, whether they knew about them or not. Fiona turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Chris, please. I know I hurt you. But I don't deserve to spend the rest of my life in prison. What do you want from me, Fee? Help me make a deal with the prosecutor. Tell them I wasn't involved in the kidnapping. In exchange, I'll give you whatever you want. The house, my retirement accounts, everything. I studied my wife of 12 years, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. She wasn't evil, just selfish and short-sighted. She'd made a series of bad decisions that had spiraled completely out of control. The compensation clause stands, I said finally. $450,000 plus additional damages for the kidnapping conspiracy. Call it an even million. I don't have $1 million. Then you'll have to figure out how to get it. Sell the house, liquidate your retirement accounts, get a loan against future earnings. I don't care how you do it, but you're going to pay what you owe. And if I do that, you'll help me with the criminal charges? I'll tell the prosecutor the truth, that you were involved in the conspiracy but probably didn't know it would escalate to kidnapping. Whether that helps you or not is up to them. Fiona nodded desperately. Okay, yes, I'll pay the settlement. In writing, Jim said, pulling out a legal document. Sign this agreement and we'll have your payment schedule worked out by the end of the week. As Fiona signed the papers with shaking hands, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This wasn't how I'd wanted our marriage to end, but it was the ending her choices had created. 3 days later, the house went up for sale. Fiona moved into a studio apartment across town and took a second job waiting tables to make ends meet. Her friends Tasha and Kim, who'd been so supportive during the early stages of the divorce, suddenly became too busy to return her phone calls. Bryce Caraway was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His wife Sylvia got everything in their divorce, the mansion, the investment accounts, the vacation homes. She also got a very lucrative book deal to write about her experience being married to a criminal executive. Morrison Financial fired Bryce immediately after his arrest and launched an internal investigation into his conduct. They found years of financial irregularities, workplace misconduct complaints that had been covered up, and evidence that he'd been embezzling company funds to pay for his extramarital relationships. The company's stock price dropped 30% in a single day. 6 months after the kidnapping, I was sitting in Pete's bar celebrating the final divorce decree when Dave walked in with a newspaper. "You need to see this," he said, sliding the paper across the table. The headline read, "Morrison Financial Executive Pleads Guilty to Federal Conspiracy Charges." The article explained that Fiona had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. She would serve 2 years in minimum security prison and pay a $100,000 fine on top of the civil damages she owed me. 2 years, I said. Could have been worse. Could have been better, Pete replied. She tried to have you ended, Chris. She tried to have me scared into dropping the lawsuit. The ending part was Bryce's idea. You're being generous. I'm being realistic. Fiona made bad choices, but she's not a butcher. She's just someone who wanted more than she was willing to work for. Dave raised his beer. To justice served. To consequences, I corrected. Justice is what happens in courtrooms. Consequences are what happen in real life. We drank to that, and I thought about how different my life had become in less than a year. I was a millionaire now, thanks to the divorce settlement and the additional damages from the kidnapping case. I'd quit my job at Tech Secure Solutions and started my own consulting firm. More importantly, I was free. Free from a marriage that had been slowly ending me. Free from a wife who'd seen me as an obstacle to her ambitions. Free to build whatever kind of life I wanted. It had cost Fiona everything. Her career, her freedom, her reputation, her financial security. But those were the consequences of her choices, not mine. Some people learn from their mistakes, others just keep making them until the price becomes too high to pay. Fiona had learned that lesson the hard way. 2 years later, I was living in a new house on the good side of town, running a successful cybersecurity consulting firm, and dating a woman who actually seemed to like me for who I was, rather than who she thought I could become. Life was good. Then Fiona got out of prison. I heard about it from Dave, who'd been keeping tabs on her release date through his contacts in the federal system. She's back in Cleveland, he told me over coffee at Pete's bar, living in a halfway house downtown, working at a call center. Her parole officer says she's been a model prisoner. Good for her. I hope she's learned something from the experience. You're not worried she might try something? Like what? She's broke, unemployed, and on federal parole. What's she gonna do? Send me angry emails? I was wrong about that. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks after Fiona's release, when I got a call from my insurance company. Someone had filed a claim against my homeowner's policy, alleging that I'd caused intentional emotional distress through my vindictive and excessive pursuit of divorce damages. The claim was bogus, of course, but it tied up my insurance for months while they investigated. Then my business started getting negative reviews online. Anonymous accounts posting detailed complaints about my unethical business practices and history of financial misuse. The reviews were sophisticated enough to hurt my search engine rankings and cost me several potential clients. My new girlfriend, Sarah, started getting anonymous phone calls at work, warning her that I was a dangerous and controlling man who'd destroyed my previous wife's life out of spite. Someone was waging a careful, methodical campaign to destroy my reputation and my business. And there was only one person with both the motive and the intimate knowledge of my life required to pull it off. I hired a private investigator to document the harassment. Within 2 weeks, he'd traced the fake online accounts, the insurance fraud, and the anonymous phone calls back to computers at the halfway house where Fiona was living. She was violating the terms of her parole by engaging in harassment and fraud, which meant she could be sent back to prison to serve the remainder of her original sentence. But before I called her parole officer, I decided to confront her directly. I found her at the call center where she worked, a depressing boiler room operation in a strip mall on the east side. She was sitting in a cubicle, wearing a cheap headset, trying to sell extended warranties to people who didn't want them. When her shift ended, I was waiting in the parking lot. "Hello, Fee." She looked older than her 40 years, worn down by prison and poverty and the weight of her own bad choices. But her eyes still held the same calculating intelligence that had attracted me when we first met. "Chris, I wondered when you'd show up. We need to talk." "About what? How you destroyed my life? How you took everything I worked for and left me with nothing? About how you're violating your parole by harassing me and my girlfriend? About how you're going back to prison if you don't stop?" She laughed bitterly. "Prison? Chris, I've been in prison for 2 years. This isn't much better. You made your choices, Fee. You chose to have an affair. You chose to conspire with Bryce. You chose to try to have me kidnapped rather than pay what you owed. I chose to want something better than a life with a man who had no ambition, no drive, no desire to be anything more than ordinary. And how did that work out for you?" Her face flushed with anger. "You want to know how it worked out? I lost everything, my career, my freedom, my future. I'm 40 years old, living in a halfway house, making minimum wage, selling garbage to people who can't afford it. My own mother won't speak to me. My friends pretend they don't know me when they see me on the street. That's not my fault, isn't it? You could have let me go quietly. You could have taken a reasonable settlement and moved on with your life. Instead, you had to destroy me completely. I enforced a contract you signed. Everything that happened after that was a result of choices you and Bryce made." "Choices," she repeated. "You want to talk about choices? Let me tell you about the choice I'm making now." She pulled out her phone and showed me a video she'd recorded. It was me, walking into the call center, clearly recognizable and time-stamped. I've been documenting every interaction we've had since I got out of prison. Every time you've followed me, every time you've had me investigated, every time you've interfered with my attempts to rebuild my life. I haven't been following you, haven't you? The private investigator you hired has been asking questions about me all over town. My parole officer has been getting anonymous tips about my suspicious activities. My employer received a detailed report about my criminal history. I hadn't done any of those things, but I could see how it might look from her perspective. "Fee, I just want you to leave me alone. Stop the harassment, stop the fake reviews, stop calling Sarah, move on with your life. Move on." She laughed again. "Chris, this is my life now. This is all I have left. And if I can't have a future, then neither can you." That's when I realized how far gone she was. Prison hadn't rehabilitated her. It had broken something fundamental inside her. She wasn't trying to rebuild her life. She was trying to drag me down to her level. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want you to suffer the way I've suffered. I want you to lose everything the way I lost everything. I want you to know what it feels like to have your life destroyed by someone who claims to love you." "And then what? We're both miserable, so we're even? Then maybe I'll be able to sleep at night." I looked at my ex-wife, this woman I'd once loved enough to marry, and felt nothing but pity. She'd become so consumed with revenge that she couldn't see any path forward except mutual destruction. "I'm sorry, Fee. I'm sorry our marriage didn't work out. I'm sorry you made the choices you made. I'm sorry you can't find a way to move forward. I don't want your pity. It's not pity. It's sadness. Sadness for what you could have been if you'd made different choices. I turned to walk away, but she called after me. This isn't over, Chris. I'll never stop. I'll make you pay for what you did to me if it takes the rest of my life. I kept walking. There was nothing left to say. The next morning, I called Fiona's parole officer and turned over all the evidence of her harassment campaign. Within 24 hours, she was back in custody, facing revocation of her parole and additional charges for fraud and stalking. At her hearing, she stood before the judge and delivered a rambling speech about how the justice system had failed her, how I had manipulated the legal process to destroy an innocent woman, how she was the real victim in all of this. The judge listened patiently, then sentenced her to serve the remainder of her original sentence, plus an additional year for the parole violations. As they led her away in handcuffs, Fiona turned back to look at me one last time. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just a kind of empty resignation. She'd finally run out of choices. I walked out of the courthouse into a bright spring morning, feeling like I just watched the end of a very long, very sad movie. Dave was waiting for me on the steps. How do you feel? He asked. Tired, I said, but free. She won't be getting out again anytime soon. I know. You could have handled this differently. Could have just ignored the harassment, waited for her to move on. Maybe, but she wasn't going to move on, Dave. She was going to keep escalating until one of us was destroyed. And now? Now she has time to think about what she really wants from the rest of her life. Maybe she'll figure out how to find some peace. And if she doesn't, I shrugged, that's not my problem anymore. We walked down the courthouse steps together, two brothers who'd been through heck and come out the other side. The sun was shining, the birds were singing, and somewhere in the city, Sarah was waiting for me to call and tell her it was finally over. Fiona had spent 4 years trying to destroy me, first through betrayal, then through violence, finally through systematic harassment. She'd lost everything in the process. Her freedom, her career, her relationships, her future, all because she'd wanted more than she was willing to work for, and she'd been willing to hurt other people to get it. Some people never learn that every choice has consequences. Some people keep making the same mistakes over and over again, each time hoping for a different result. Fiona was one of those people. But I wasn't. I'd learned to choose carefully, to think about consequences before acting, to build rather than destroy. And that, more than any amount of money or legal victory, was what real success looked like.